Open Door is the podcast multifamily owners, builders, and developers turn to for insights, ideas, and identifying solutions. You don't want to miss the latest episode. Welcome to Open Door by Cox Communities, a show dedicated to bringing you the latest information, hottest trends, and newest technologies for you to consider when making decisions for your multifamily communities. Hi, I'm your host, Valerie Sargent. And today on the show, we're taking a deep dive into the complex world of government housing policies and their profound impact on the multifamily industry. I'm very pleased to share that our guests for this important conversation are Courtney Levinas, the president and CEO of the Arizona Multi-Housing Association, and Susan Anable, the Phoenix Market Vice President at Cox Communications. Together, we'll explore the nuances of housing policies, dissecting their effects on residents, owners, managers, developers, and the broader housing market. So join me in welcoming Courtney and Susan to Open Door. Welcome, Courtney and Susan. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
Glad to be here.
My pleasure. Yeah, how are you ladies doing?
Good.
Terrific.
Awesome. So Courtney, I'd love to start with your perspective. How do current multifamily housing policies impact affordability and accessibility for renters in Arizona?
So that's a great question. Right now in Arizona, it's economics 101. It's about housing supply and demand. Prior to the Great Recession, we'd overbuilt a little bit with housing. It showed in the price points. But since the Great Recession, we've underbuilt up until really the last couple of years. And so we are suffering from a market that did not keep up with demand. The Arizona Department of Housing has released their statistics on this. And in Arizona, we're about 270,000 units short of where we need to be.
Wow.
And that drives the cost. And that's why we have an affordability issue here.
For sure. What changes are being proposed to address these types of issues?
So for the last several years, Arizona Multi-Housing Association has been working hand in hand with the legislature to try to get some legislation passed to encourage more development. The last couple of years, we weren't successful at it, but I'm very hopeful that in 2024, we're going to get some bills across the finish line. Two of them, in fact, are what we call consensus bills. So House Bill 2297 and Senate Bill 1162 are two examples of that. And when I say consensus bills, they are bills that AMA worked with the League of Cities and Towns, cities and town councils and mayors to develop legislation that we can all agree on. And House Bill 2297 allows for multifamily redevelopment, or what we call adaptive reuse of commercial, office, and retail. So when you have, kind of economically, functionally obsolete buildings in Arizona, these are prime opportunities to convert them to multifamily. So it's focused on the urban areas, cities of 150,000 and above. And it'll be a win-win for the cities and for our residents because property values in commercial buildings that are vacant or almost vacant have dropped. And so by rehabbing those buildings and turning them into housing, it creates an increase in property taxes that benefits the city, that benefits the schools, and really revitalizes the area. So we're really excited about that bill. And then Senate Bill 1162, again, another consensus bill, requires cities to do a housing study. And I know that seems basic, but a lot of cities don't have these. And so they don't know what their housing needs are based on, their population growth or their employment expectations. So 1162 will require that, as well as a shot clock on rezoning. So you have to have a rezoning completed in 180 days. Right now, it can take 2 to 4 years to get through the rezoning process. So the faster we can get to market, the faster we can start leasing units and, again, start meeting this affordability crisis.
And just out of curiosity, with regard to that first House bill that you were talking about with the commercial buildings, what is the percentage of buildings that are available to be converted? Because I know sometimes based on the foundation, that can be a little difficult.
So, one of the beauties about this bill is that it allows the developer to either come in and keep the existing building, keep that building envelope, if you will, or if it just is not going to work, to actually demolish the building. So, it gives them the options, which creates, I think, more opportunities for housing. But again, we have put safeguards in the bill. Having worked with, the League of Cities and Towns, you don't want to take an office building that was built 10 years ago that is still full and a good building. We're really going to be looking for buildings, not necessarily blighted, but buildings that have exceeded their useful life. And, they need to be revitalized, remodeled. And we see example of it throughout Arizona where it's already worked, but this will expedite the process because you don't have to go through a rezoning process if you meet the qualifications that we've outlined in the legislation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a big difference. Because you were saying the zoning process and everything can take up to 4 years.
Yeah, in some cases.
Oh my gosh, that's a long time.
Long time.
So, Susan, could you please share some insights on how Cox is addressing the digital divide issue within multifamily communities in Phoenix and with affordability of having access to broadband and the internet?
Yeah, it's a relevant question right now. And I think the advent of a global pandemic a few years ago really drove home how critically important connectivity is. And I think whereas, internet connectivity used to be viewed as a nice to have, a luxury, it really isn't. People have to be able to work from home, learn from home, conduct their healthcare with their providers from home, all of that. And so I'm grateful that my company has been aware of this issue and the need to have everybody connected to the internet and has committed to a program for over 12 years called Connect to Compete. And that's one of several of our low income offers that we provide to our customers. And if they are eligible, and there's a whole host of eligibility criteria under which they could qualify for these low cost offers, we can get them connected, provide them a modem, even provide a subsidized device to them if they don't have a laptop or computer in the home. And so with some of our multifamily communities, we know that may be the only point of connection that they may have. And so that's really critical to make sure that if they can get internet in their unit, in their complex, we want to be able to connect them. So that's been a longstanding priority for the company. We are very committed to making sure everybody can stay connected. But we also have some other ways to make sure, and that's by making sure that we have opportunities within the community, the adjacent communities. So we have Cox Innovation and Technology Labs. And they're basically these enhanced computer labs that we can stand up in a place like a Boys and Girls Club or the Salvation Army or the UMOM Center, where people that may not be able to get access in their apartment complex or in their home can come into those locations and job search or do homework or whatever it is that they need to do. So that's an approach we've taken to make sure that even if a person can't get internet in their home or in their apartment, they'll have an opportunity to use the internet. We also have Cox Wi-Fi hotspots all over the valley. So we have thousands of hotspots that are available, over 800,000 in Metro Phoenix. And so people that may have our low-cost internet service can stay connected when they're out and about in the communities. It's not limited just to where they're physically living. They'll have access to the Wi-Fi network as well. So those are some of the key ways that we have historically and continue to support families. And we know that priority becomes even more important in lower income communities where affordability or access are challenges.
Definitely. And I love that you're aligning yourself with organizations to be able to provide service at those types of facilities. That's really important. And I'm wondering, what policy support do you believe is necessary in order to enhance digital inclusion for all renters?
It's a great and very timely question, in part because one of the big reasons that we've been able to connect so many homes in recent years is that during the end of the pandemic and in the first year or two afterwards that we've been in, there was federal funding that was provided under the Affordable Connectivity Program. And that provided up to $30 subsidy per month to low-income households to be able to get internet. Cox and other internet service providers, we all stepped in and participated in that program to connect families. Well, that funding is running out starting next month. So in heading into April, May, those families that have been on that program will lose that subsidy without congressional action to restore funding. And so from a policy perspective, it's really that federal level policy that is going to have a huge impact on those families. And there's over 500,000 in Arizona for Cox. So it's a significant number of our customers.
And they're all over the country as well. I mean, and so I think the only thing that we can do right now is really contact all of our Congress people in order to urge them to take action.
Yes, it's very important. And I think, there's been a great effort to try to push this forward, but I think certainly more can be done. And unfortunately, the tragedy of it is that there will be a number of households and families that will have to drop their internet service. We're going to do everything we can as a company to find a soft landing for them. We've got other options. We're going to be able to try to get them into an internet service that'll keep them connected, but it's going to take everybody. And, in that sense, those partnerships I mentioned earlier too, we have some wonderful partners in Arizona like CPLC and the Boys and Girls Clubs. And I think it's going to take all of us working with local communities and our education partners to find creative solutions. So, whether it's more technology labs and that sort of thing, or it's finding ways to creatively fund and support those low-income families staying with an internet service provider, it's going to take everything.
And I'm curious about the hotspots that you've placed throughout the city. How are you marketing that for them to know it's a safe spot? Because that's one of the dangers when somebody connects to an open Wi-Fi spot. There are some tricksters out there who are trying to say, oh, we are Cox Communications, but they're not. How are you avoiding that and making sure that they know that you are the legitimate hotspot?
Right. Well, obviously, we have our Wi-Fi hotspots will come up when somebody's searching for a network on their phone or on their device, and then they have to authenticate to get into the system. And they do so typically because they are an internet customer. But sometimes we open up our network for free for use by the community as well. So there's an authentication process that goes into that to make sure that people are sure they're getting on the correct Cox Wi-Fi network. So it's a great question and a great point. Security and access are two things that go hand in hand.
Yeah, I know I was at an area and I was trying to connect to a hotspot yesterday, but I'm like, which one is the right one? I'm not sure. So I know that comes up for people. So Courtney, what role does the Arizona Multi-Housing Association play in shaping state housing policies? And how do you advocate for both renters and property owners? It's kind of like you're on both sides of the fence there.
I know you would think there would, we would be at odds, but I mean, similar to what Susan was saying with Cox Communications, we are an advocate for our residents as well as, our members, those that own rental property throughout Arizona. And a perfect example of that is, during COVID, we all came together when the emergency rental assistance was deployed to try to get it moving faster, to expedite it, to get it to residents that were either unemployed and at home and weren't able to make their rent payments, or obviously schools were closed. So many people had to leave their jobs to take care of children. So that is one area that we really wanted to make sure we could keep as many people in their homes as possible during COVID. And so we worked hand in hand with state, federal, local governments to get that money deployed. But, other examples include the last legislative session. AMA worked with the Arizona Realtors Association, who had introduced legislation to eliminate sales tax on residential rent. I mean, if you can believe this, Arizona is one of two states that allow local jurisdictions to charge residents taxes on their home. I mean, it is it is the most regressive tax. I mean, it's probably more regressive than a food tax, which universally throughout the United States, people think is the most regressive. But, you've got Arizona and Alaska that allowed cities to charge sales tax on rent. And we worked with the realtors, with the legislature to eliminate that tax. It'll go away January 1, 2025. It is a $230 million annual tax that renters pay simply because they rent their home and not own their home.
Yeah. And it's like the property owners, they of course have their property taxes, but that's not something we see in other states.
It's not. And I understand it is a revenue source for cities and towns, and they are looking at all of their revenue sources now to make up for that. But again, you shouldn't be subject to a separate additional tax because you rent your home versus owning your home. And again, not in all cases, but some of our residents are those that can least afford this tax. I mean, similar to what Susan was saying with the internet, and we really want to protect those residents as best we can. Another piece of legislation that we worked on a couple of years ago, there's a couple now coming out of COVID, but during COVID, the justice court system created virtual courts. And, because nobody could, you couldn't go to court. So they created virtual court, and we ran legislation to require the justice courts throughout Arizona to continue to use virtual court because it made sense for our residents. I mean, don't get me wrong, it was also beneficial for a property manager that may have to go to court, but mostly it was beneficial for our residents because it's hard to get to a justice court. Even though justice courts are the ones typically closest to you, you still may have to take time off work. You might have to find childcare. You might have to find public transportation to get you there. So we've discovered over the last couple of years that residents are showing up in court and defending themselves or their position, whatever the case is, which makes for a better process so that they're involved in the process and they understand. So those are a couple of examples of where we try to help our residents in addition to our property owners and managers. It's not an us versus them as, some in the media and elsewhere would like to portray it, but it's a partnership. We're in the business of providing housing, and we want to make sure our residents are living in clean, safe, and affordable homes.
Well, and related to that, I know when there have been conversations about rent control in certain areas, I would think that an association such as yours, who is working with both groups, has the ability to actually have more meaningful conversations because it's well-intentioned to provide rent control, but it doesn't always accomplish the things that people hope it will accomplish. And so are you able to speak to both sides of that more easily?
We do. And we understand. I mean, just like Susan does with internet, I know there's been discussions on, capping what you can charge for these types of things. And universally, economists rarely agree. But universally, economists agree that price caps or price controls, especially in the form of rent, doesn't work. While it might sound like a good solution, right during COVID, in Arizona, we experienced record occupancy. So our occupancy, I would say, was at 97, 98, which is virtually full.
Yeah.
I mean, that's basically just turning an apartment. And rents were going up a lot because of that demand. We had not enough units to meet the demand. But, we've seen in examples where other cities have, like St. Paul, Minnesota, imposed a pretty stringent rent control ordinance several years ago. And almost overnight, their permits for new housing dropped 80%. So what they ended up doing is exacerbating their affordable housing situation because they drove people out of the market.
In regards to development, right?
Yeah. Right. So people who build and develop and provide housing go somewhere else. And then that, leaves that community in a worse situation and those residents in a worse situation than they were before.
Because they have less supply.
Correct.
Well, Susan, from a Cox perspective, how do connectivity and technology services play into that broader conversation about housing policy, especially there in the Phoenix market?
It's interesting, and what Courtney just shared, and it's not dissimilar when it comes to issues like connectivity and technology. Policy issues are keenly impactful on our ability to serve. But as I discussed earlier, I think everybody recognizes that you can't get by without having an internet connection to live, to work, to get educated, to get healthcare. And so the more important those services become, the more temptation there is, I think, in the policymaking arena to get in and kind of micromanage them and to suggest how providers should have to provide their products, where they should have to provide their services, how much they charge for their services. And what we've experienced in our industry is that the most investment and innovation that's happened in the broadband industry has come with a very light touch regulatory oversight. And so, with that sort of as the umbrella, I think from a policy perspective is encouraging and continuing those light touch regulatory policies to continue the interest of providers like Cox and others to invest and to innovate technologies. And so when you're looking at things like what's important to a homeowner or a renter, that connectivity inside the home, really important, high-speed internet, but it's also powering a lot of internet-enabled devices in the customer's home. Not the least of which are things like security systems, but also things now like your washing machine, your refrigerator. The average home has a ridiculous number of internet-enabled connected devices in the home. So making sure that we are able to continue to meet the needs of the customers that sit in a home or sit in an apartment complex is really important. I will say that one good news, bright opportunity coming on the horizon, particularly for renters, but also for homeowners in Maricopa County, is that Maricopa County, in partnership with ASU and the Sun Corridor, have put their infrastructure dollars that they got from the federal government towards making sure that these unserved pockets within Maricopa County, which a lot of people think of Maricopa County and think, how can there be communities or neighborhoods that don't have internet service? And there actually are a few. And so they're partnering with companies like Cox and putting their money where their mouth is and saying, we want to make sure these areas are not left behind, that these residents have access to the internet. So from a policy perspective, it was a great example of a county government, a state university, an entity that's a product of the Board of Regents, and a private industry provider like Cox coming together to solve for that problem. So I wanted to call that out as sort of a good example of policy where when you recognize there are gaps and there are areas or communities that don't have access to the internet, there are ways to solve for it. But it takes creativity and a lot of partnership to get it done.
And understanding.
Yes.
So, Susan, those are instances where a bulk billing program could really come in and help a situation and create affordable access to broadband services. And I know there's been some questions about bulk billing and if that's a good solution, but it's really one of the best solutions to get affordable broadband out there. Would you agree?
Absolutely. If you've got a community, a neighborhood, a complex that a partner, a nonprofit, a local government has been willing to step up and help pay for services or subsidize services for those residents, that is a huge benefit to the people who live in that area, that community. And so being able to provide a bulk service to that neighborhood or that community is really important as a way to ensure service and connectivity. And so it's also, the idea of broadband service providers, I don't think anybody can dispute there is intense competition in our market. There are many providers that are willing to come in and serve. And I think that when you find company or community partners that are willing to work together to ensure service to a community or a complex, I don't think there should be policies that would restrict the ability to do that because it's solving for a real community and societal need.
Yeah, and I think not everyone understands how it all works together and what it costs even to put a system into a community. So I think it's important that we help people understand how those types of programs actually work and how they make broadband more affordable.
Yeah, so important and so important to our residents, as Susan said. One of the chief complaints we can get with our residents is not having internet or not having fast enough internet. So we're aligned with Cox Communications on that. We need to protect that.
It's table stakes now, right, Courtney?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody expects it. It's not an amenity that's
it's not an amenity
nice
anymore.
to have.
Right.
It's an amenity that renters expect. And, we've tried to find ways to make sure that when a renter is moving in on day one, they're not without service. It used to be you'd have to call and they'd come and connect services. We have a quick connect program now with some of our partners, and it ensures that the minute you come in on move-in day, your internet service is active. Also an expectation of your renters and buyers too. Mm-hmm.
Yep. With so many of our residents now working from home, and we have a lot of residents in Arizona who are actually working for companies in California and other states, but they're choosing to live here. So all the more reason we have to make sure we protect this.
Definitely.
Expectations are high.
They are. Courtney, can you discuss any recent policy initiatives aimed at protecting renters from eviction or rent hikes, especially in light of economic fluctuations?
Yeah. So in any given year at the Arizona legislature, there's a litany of bills right along the lines of what you've talked about, elimination of our rent control preemption. So we have a preemption at the state level in Arizona that preempts cities and towns from imposing rent control. We've defeated legislation this year that would require inclusionary zoning, that would preempt us from doing background checks, that would require that we allow what we call source of income. And that's actually provisions that have passed in Tucson and Phoenix and Tempe, where those that own rental properties have to take Section 8 or housing choice vouchers. And again, it's not that the industry is against housing choice vouchers. We want to provide those opportunities for the residents. Our challenge is that it's the strings attached to a HUD program that was developed in the 70s as a voluntary program. And between us here, it really has not been updated much since the 70s. So it's a program that needs to be modernized to meet current market conditions and demands. So on any given year, there's a number of bills that are introduced at the legislature that didn't make it very far this year. But again, we continue to work with all legislators and our residents to make sure that, we're creating an environment where it's regulatorily balanced in Arizona. And that's part of the reason we have such a great, real estate market. And that is part of the reason that Arizona has been affordable for so long. So we really want to keep that balance in place so that it's beneficial for those who choose to invest their dollars here by building housing and providing housing opportunities, but also balanced for, the residents that want to live here, so that we do try to keep it affordable. It's not an easy balance to strike, but it is certainly one we work to achieve.
Certainly. That's really helpful. Susan, the Phoenix region has been the poster child for new development, but with supply cost and interest rates increasing, the building of new communities actually slowed down. So how are cities within Maricopa County handling these types of challenges?
Yeah, great example. And Courtney mentioned it earlier. It's sort of economics 101, and it's trying to keep ahead of, or at least caught up with, the demand cycles. And, I think everybody would recognize, Phoenix really has been a poster child in new supply really over the last couple of years. The increases in demand have gotten the developers to fill that pipeline, right? So in fact, I think I heard this last week, Phoenix is expected to have over 33,000 units come online, rental units in 2024. And that's double what
great.
they did this last year. So the city of Phoenix has been very supportive and proactive. And that's really great news for renters, right? Given low occupancy rates in the Phoenix area, there's going to be more supply. They'll be more empowered as renters. And as Courtney mentioned, hitting that right balance, that's going to mean the rents are going to continue to drop. I think I saw that the rental rates in Metro Phoenix and places like Glendale, Scottsdale, Gilbert, they've come down about 9 to 10% year over year in the last year. So all that said, I think it's about, the communities that have recognized what the supply chain looks like and trying to be proactive in filling that pipeline. And, the rising interest rates, the supply chain costs, they're all going to be counterproductive. And so not everything's going to make it to market. There's about 150 projects under construction now in Metro Phoenix, and it could blow out exponentially. But, some of these mitigating factors like the interest rates and rising construction costs, it's going to kind of slow things down. So, but even if a small portion of that ends up delivering, it's a lot of supply pressure to some of these areas. And, some of the submarkets to keep an eye on, at least from a Cox perspective, and we track and monitor these things, downtown Phoenix, Tempe, Mesa, Chandler, those are all going to continue to be areas where you're going to see sort of this ebb and flow of supply and demand, and kind of seeing how that pipeline is getting filled. Another thing worth mentioning too, and we haven't talked about it, but the single family rental properties that are exploding in the valley too. And you look at the communities that have recognized, okay, we need to be able to meet all needs. So maybe there are still buyers in the market in spite of high interest rates and low supply on the single family homes. And then we've got the rental part of the business with the MDUs, and we've got more of those coming online. But then in the middle are these people that would like to live in a house. They can't afford to live in a house,
Right.
But they would rent a house. And so the explosion of these, rent to live in homes has really been pretty phenomenal. I mean, I understand that Arizona has the hottest market in the country. And
it's kind of the birthplace of what we call, build to rent.
Right, build to rent.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
What percentage of single family homes are you seeing that are built to rent?
That's a good question. And I don't have a direct answer for you, but I mean, we're really seeing this kind of niche market really, as Susan said, continued to grow. Where we're seeing it the most, I would say, is a little bit more of the suburb areas in the East Valley and the West Valley. And exactly like Susan said, I mean, we have residents in these communities that, they want a little yard. They want to have a little yard for their dogs or their pets. But we're also seeing a huge percentage in these communities that are renters by choice. They want to kind of feel like they're living in a single family home, but they want this lock it and leave it lifestyle where they don't have maintenance and they don't have these kind of homeowner requirements hanging over their head,
That's
if you
me.
will. So it's really met, kind of this multi-need or desire in the market here in Arizona.
Yeah, especially
That's
with
fantastic.
the seasonality.
I'm glad you brought that up, Susan.
Yeah, well, the seasonality of our
yeah.
market too. So you're somebody and you want to come and spend your winters here and you have a little dog and you want a gated community and you can have a house lifestyle and still be here for 6 or 7 months of the year. So I can see.
And get the heck out of
appeal.
Dodge during that hot summer.
Those
Yes.
smart people that aren't here in July and August.
Yeah.
There are certain months that I try not to visit Arizona.
Now, I would have to caveat this, and maybe Courtney can back this up, but one of the reasons that this type of housing has proliferated in Arizona is, it circumvents our groundwater management laws that require a 100-year water supply to be demonstrated for any, residential growth like that in Metro Phoenix in particular, but in some other areas of the state as well. So I understand there's some people looking at maybe closing that. You could call it a loophole, I guess. But
I know they call it a
that law.
loophole.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard a lot
Yeah.
I've heard a lot about water supply there in some of those areas and some of the new communities that were being built. And is there enough water for those?
Huge issue. I mean, and as Susan mentioned, so our Groundwater Act that was created in the 80s, it's a consumer protection act that protects homeowners from buying a home and then, 10, 20 years running out of water. So while it doesn't affect rental property and some call it a loophole, we really don't see it that way. It's a consumer protection act to protect your largest investment. Those that build and rent, apartment communities, or in this case, build to rent, they tend to be a much more sophisticated buyer and investor. They're not going to invest in an area that's going to run out of water. There are attempts at the legislature to do away with this and require all housing, regardless of whether it's owner-occupied or rental, to comply with the 100-year assured water supply requirement. But I'll tell you, from our perspective on the multi-housing side, when it comes to that water resource, we are one of the most, if not the most efficient user of that, especially in the apartment communities where, there is limited landscape. And again, we're much more efficient when it comes to our natural resources on water usage, electric usage, and even the carbon footprint of driving. Our residents do tend to be closer to where they work, so they're not driving as much. So, of course, we believe we're the answer to climate change, but I know some will argue against that. But again, we're a good steward of the natural resources.
Yes. And Susan, you may be able to speak to the smart home technology that helps owners realize, do they have any leaks going on that need to be taken care of, and really help conserve water in that way?
Yeah, it's a great call out. And we talked earlier about how smart technology in the home it's here to stay. It can offer a lot of opportunities for people to better manage their energy use and consumption in the home with technology, to detect water leaks, to do better management of their overall household. So there's so many benefits to having the connectivity in the house to enable technology that's going to help make for greener living, reducing carbon footprint, all of that. Not to mention the ability to work from home, which keeps people out of their cars and creating, pollution in the valley. So, there's a lot of benefit to having technology enabled and connectivity in the home. And I wanted to go back on the subject of water because I think it's just such a huge issue for us here in Arizona that every conversation that seems to be had about development starts with water. And you would expect that. We're in the desert Southwest. And so, access and supply are huge issues. But as Courtney said, residential use of water is really the lowest consumptive use of water in the state. But it's the one that really is held to the highest standard for demonstrating viability. But, we're talking about what cities are doing to help with development and help with these policies. And I think you've seen more cities like Buckeye, right? That's a great example where they are actively partnering with the development community, actively partnering with other water rights owners to try to solve for these problems. And sometimes at the end of the day, it's not a matter of if there is enough water, it's is the water in the right places. So seeing these creative partnerships that some of the communities with working with the developers and even the environmental community at times can come up with some really creative solutions to make sure that we're meeting our development and our housing needs for the county and for the state.
Well, and something that's always shocking to individuals when we mention, and I might have my years off slightly, so don't hold me to this, but in general,
Okay.
we are using the same amount or less water now than we were using 40 or 50 years ago. And when you think about, I mean, I was born and raised here in Phoenix, so I've seen, this incredible exponential growth from the, town that I lived in when I was young to where it is now. And when you think about that and the sheer number of residents who have moved here, it's hard to fathom that, but we're using the same or less than we were using 40, 50 years ago.
I think we're all more conscious of our use now. And now that use has the ability to be monitored by meters and things like that. And we used to see water running off with a sprinkler head off on the sidewalk during a rainstorm. And people are more mindful of things like that.
Thanks to the internet, we can turn off our sprinklers remotely.
Yes, exactly.
Thanks, Susan.
Or even see with cameras like, oh my gosh, look at that sprinkler head.
It's all possible.
I am loving our time together today, but unfortunately our time is limited. So we're kind of coming to the end of things here. I wanted to, as we wrap things up today, give each of you a moment to leave the audience with a bit of parting advice. So what is the most important thing that you want them to take away from our conversation here today? And Susan, I'll start with you.
Harkening back to a comment I made earlier, I think it's about how the importance of connectivity and technology in housing, how important that is to managing and addressing many of our personal and our societal needs. And I think I would be remiss if I didn't call out our partners and friends, people like Courtney Levinas and other people in the building industry that are acutely aware of that. And so I think the opportunity to continue to partner together to solve for the problems that we have to deal with, like water and like land availability and local zoning and all of that, is really contingent upon all of us to continue to work together. Arizona is a great place for people to live, work, and play. We're not going to stop people from coming here, but we do have the opportunity, I think, working together to make sure that we meet the needs of those who do want to come and live here, whether it's part of the year or all of the year. So I think that would be the takeaway is that partnership is the necessary element for solving for all of our issues related to housing.
It's so true. And then with you, Courtney, what do you think is the most important thing you want people to take away?
Yeah, I mean, I'm similar to what Susan just said. I mean, Arizona is such an incredible state. I'm obviously very biased, but I want in Arizona and specifically a Phoenix area where, my son can live and can afford to live. And even, my parents, downsizing, I would love them to be able to continue to afford to live here. But we want a community like that, then we really need to push for and advocate for more housing at all price points, but especially in that workforce and that affordable market. We're at a critical juncture here in Arizona. We have an affordable housing crisis, but we have an opportunity to address it. But if we don't address it in a meaningful way, it's going to tilt that other direction, and we might be to a point of no return. So, I mean, we really encourage residents that live here, business owners that have their businesses here, businesses that are expanding here, to really help and be that advocate for housing. We can't stop building housing, although I know there are some that's like, no, I don't want that housing near me. But we need to in order to meet the demand and continue to make Arizona the strong economic state that it is. So that's my parting thought on that. I sound like a broken record, I know.
No, not at all. I think it's all important, and the partnership aspects are so important. And I thank you both for partnering with me here today. This has been such a wonderful conversation, and I'm so glad we had the opportunity to all come together on it.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Valerie.
Thanks again to Courtney and Susan for joining us on the show today and talking all about some of the ways that policy choices impact the multifamily housing industry. And if you enjoyed the show, please remember to rate and leave us a review. Thanks again for listening. I'm Valerie Sargent, and this has been Open Door, brought to you by Cox Communities. We're in the top 1% of business podcasts for a reason. Subscribe now so you never miss a moment.